6:44 now, 1320 WILS. So the governor clarifying his stance on allowing Syrian refugees into the state. He says at this point, he wants to hold, quote, efforts to accept new refugees, but any refugees that are set to come to Michigan, he is ready to have them here. But what exactly do they go through? I mean, how are they confirmed not to be potential terrorists? Let's talk to Eric Cedillo, immigration attorney, who knows these issues really better than most people do. Eric, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and you're based down in Texas, so tell me this: in terms of refugee issues, how often are you dealing with that kind of thing?
Quite honestly, there aren't that many refugee issues, specifically with respect to the Syrians. I think in Texas we have about 200 that have taken part in the refugee program today.
And is it clear how they're screened before we let them in here?
Well, actually, the refugee process is probably the most vetted screening that there is in terms of status. They make application. The refugee makes application with the United Nations, and then after that, they're passed on if they're determined to be, and after vetting, they're determined to be someone who could apply for refugee status in the United States, turned over to the State Department, and then there's an incredible amount of vetting with respect to Homeland Security, National, Center for Counterterrorism, the FBI, things of that nature.
Really? So you think that we'd be able to, in a 100% way, stop for terrorists from coming in this way?
Well, in all honesty, I don't know that there's ever a 100% guarantee of that. But in terms of the actual, refugee vetting process, that would be one, and quite honestly, one that could be heightened with respect to the refugees coming from Syria.
When you hear governors like our own who say, look, we're going to stop bringing new refugees in at this point, especially after Paris. What's your view on that?
Well, quite honestly, I don't think they have the legal authority to do that. Refugee status is totally within the governance of the federal government, and of course the president through executive order and action. The Refugee Act of 1980 clearly gives him that authority to determine who's capable of being a refugee and coming into the country.
Can a state, though, decide not to allow them into our particular state?
Yeah, I don't believe that a state can do that. I don't believe the government has, or the governor has the authority to deny that. What they might have the authority to do is deny cooperation from their Department of Health and Human Services as to the actual program.
So to provide services, that kind of thing?
Right. Well, quite honestly, the refugee status, there's an Office of Refugee Resettlement. The government, the federal government, is responsible for that. And then they go through the state's Departments of Health and Human Services to find the contractors that actually do the actual resettlement, which are usually nonprofit organizations that resettle the refugees. But quite honestly, there isn't a whole lot that the states really do in terms of doing this program.
And how do the feds decide then to bring them to Michigan or another state? What's the process of that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of considerations. Usually they try to, they don't put them in cities where, it's very expensive. You wouldn't see a lot of refugees in New York City. They take into consideration demographics where there is additional settlements of perhaps Syrian refugees. If there's a large congregation or a group, then that might be a consideration that they would use in determining where they go. The bigger states, of course, California and Texas are two states that would take on refugees probably more than most.
They wouldn't. Why is that? Just because of their size?
Because of the size. Because of the size.
What do you think of the idea, though, at least temporarily, of stopping the inflow of Syrian refugees?
Well, quite honestly, I think we have there's a serious situation over there. I mean, the Syrians, there's 11 million people that are displaced, 7 million within the country, and 4 million that are in other countries. They need the help now, and quite honestly, what Obama is asking for is about 10,000 over the next 12 months. That's in comparison to the 2 million in Turkey and over 1 million in Lebanon and Jordan. So quite honestly, it's kind of a drop in the bucket in terms of the assistance that we're looking at providing in terms of the refugees.
Right. But what happens when you have this effect? I mean, obviously, there was some vetting done in Europe, I'm guessing, and Lebanon just had an explosion there. What do you do if that is the part of the reality that some of these refugees may have other motives?
Well, I think what people don't really realize is that the vetting process usually takes 18 to 24 months. It's not like they're doing this in 10 days and then sending people over here. So it's a situation where they're actually being vetted and have been vetted for a little while. Syria was granted TPS, or temporary protected status, and we have people who've actually, utilized that. The refugees, the designation of a refugee is held to the highest scrutiny in terms of the vetting process. Mm-hmm. So it's one that takes months, and if not years, quite honestly. So it's a situation where this isn't going to, these people have probably already been vetted to a certain extent, and you'll see the folks coming over that have been in the process for some time.
Right. I mean, that is 10,000. I mean, do you think we should be bringing more Syrian refugees than just the 10,000?
Well, I guess that's a matter of what you think about what we should be doing as a country in terms of reaching out and helping some people. Mm-hmm. These folks are quite honestly they're in some very dire straits. People who are not finding enough food, good drinking water, good health care. They're living in tent cities where they're not having access to the things that they need, education for the children. So quite honestly, from my personal opinion, I definitely think we should be doing more.
Eric Cedillo, immigration attorney. Website is cedillolaw.com, based down there in Texas. Really an expert on these matters. Eric, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.